All right, everyone. Well, thank you again for being with us. And last week was Labor Day, and usually on Labor Day we talk about these ideas we're going to talk about today about work and labor and what the human mind has developed as far as ideas about work and labor and what the divine mind, what we believe the divine mind must think about work and labor. And if there's a gap between the two, then what can we do in order to cross it? But last week, as I said, the idea of the Eightfold Path of Buddhism was something that just really grabbed a hold of me and said, this is something to to explore this day. And within that, of course, is the idea of right action and right livelihood. Remember, we said last week that that the purpose of following the path, a spiritual path, or following the Buddhist path, as the Buddhists would put it, is to remove the causes of pain and suffering, which are ignorance, which are grasping, or greed or desire, and which are aversion, trying to get out of things that are unpleasant, which pretty much describes the world as we see it today. If you stop and think about what is motivating people, what's going on in the world, it's certainly a lot of ignorance, a lot of greed, a lot of perhaps laziness or aversion, or trying to avoid doing the things that ought to be done in order to make life and this world a better place. So I think it's very timely then that we come to something that can help us as individuals on our path of spiritual growth, to kind of reflect where we are on our journey. It's very nice to explore noble ideas. It's very nice to read uplifting books and listen to uplifting talks and sing uplifting songs. All of those things are very good, and they have a time and a place in our personal growth, in our spiritual growth. But as Ernest Holmes says in the 4th chapter to the introduction of the textbook, he says there's a great danger that we'll spend too much time thinking about it and talking about it, and not enough time actually doing it, not enough time actually practicing it. And the reason that the practice is so important is because it is only in the practice, it is only in the doing that we know if we really understand it, if we really have it, if we truly believe it. Perhaps we only think we believe it, perhaps we only want to believe it, perhaps it only feels good to say that we believe it, that we live in a wonderful world where God is perfect, whole, and complete. And there's a certain, as Holmes would say, there's a certain salutary effect, there's a certain feel-good effect about all that. But there comes a time when we have to ask ourselves, do I really believe this? Do I really use this in my life? Do I really believe that life is a spiritual system, or that life is a material system? And I often ask folks to try to make things as truly simple as possible. I ask folks to consider, do you believe that consciousness created matter? Or do you believe that matter created consciousness? And that's kind of like the fundamental question of this whole discussion, if you will, this whole debate between that which we call science and that which we call religion. In the religious or spiritual traditions, it is consciousness that creates matter. Right? There was nothing, there was void, there was chaos, and in this consciousness that is known as God, or the Great Spirit, or the Creator, or whatever the particular tradition calls it, this consciousness is what I'm calling it, this consciousness of the divine, somehow caused creation to be. It spoke its word. It was a mental act, because it doesn't have vocal cords and a body like we do. It was an act of intention. It was an act of will. It was a deliberate act in which the divine said, there will be. In Genesis, which is probably most familiar to us in our culture, it's the story of creation in Genesis. And on the first day, God said, let there be this. And on the second day, God said, let there be that. And then something happened to that command, to that declaration, to let it be. Something that we call the law of mind took that declaration and did what needed to be done in order to create the perfect outpicturing in the physical world, the perfect outpicturing of what already existed in the mental world, in the spiritual world. As Emmett Fox would tell us in our treatment work, and Ernest Holmes as well, talks about creating the mental equivalent. Thomas Troward tells us that once we have seen and felt and experienced the end result as an already accomplished fact, we have created the ways and means through which this power, this law of mind operates in order to create and change the circumstances in our own lives. So the microcosm and the macrocosm there is that in the big picture, the divine creates through an act of consciousness, and that act of consciousness causes energy to collapse into matter and to take form, and that form is for the purpose of expressing something that the divine wanted to express, something that the divine wanted to experience. And because we are created in that image and likeness, because it created us out of itself, we too interface with and interact with this power. It is done unto us according to our belief. As you think and believe in your heart, so it is. That's New Testament, that's Old Testament. Buddhism says everything you have experienced is a result of what you have thought. The Stoic philosophers and later on the motivational writers of the 1920s and 1930s repeated, what the mind can conceive and believe, the mind can achieve. Dr. Holmes put it very simply, change your thinking, change your life. So all of these things are on the side of the question in favor of consciousness creates matter. The physical world as we know it is an outpicturing of belief, is an outpicturing of consciousness. That consciousness acted upon by the doer of the word, by the law of mind, by that which takes the belief and brings it into fruition, into experience. And then the materialist side of the equation is that no, life is all just purely organic, that the elements and the chemicals of the earth got together through purely mechanical, chemical processes, and they organized themselves, and somehow they created life. And that very thing that we recognize as life, even though it may have only been a single-celled animal, that it advanced, it evolved. It adapted to its environment in a manner that caused it to organize itself further. So clusters of single-celled animals, for example, started to get together for their mutual benefit. And then the different clusters started to specialize. In plant life, some became the cells that react to sunlight to produce food. Some became the veins that carry the food up to the leaf, and so forth. In the animals, in the fish, some became eyes, some cells became eyes, some cells became internal organs, some cells became flippers, and those sorts of things. But the idea is that life as we know it is nothing more than this interaction of matter with itself. That there's no higher power or divine consciousness or God, something like that, that is orchestrating and directing this, that this is all just kind of a chemical mechanical reaction, and part of that chemical mechanical reaction created a brain, and the brain created consciousness. And that's why I say the fundamental question is did consciousness create matter, or did matter create consciousness? A few months ago in our Skype group we were watching some lectures that were given before the United Nations. The United Nations had a conference on the mind-body connection, and there were people from various disciplines around the world speaking there. And one of the speakers said that there had been a debate in some scientific circle, I don't remember which one it was, and they were trying to define consciousness, and they wanted to define consciousness as the sum total of the chemical reactions in the brain. And other scientists pushed back and said, you can't prove that. Scientifically, you can't, how could you possibly prove that? And this particular scientist went on to explain his reasons why he personally believed as a scientist could demonstrate that which we call consciousness is not so much a function of the brain as the brain is a function of consciousness. In other words, consciousness created the brain as a vehicle to use. So this is a question worth pondering because it helps us to kind of think about, well, what do I really believe? What do I really believe? I'm on a spiritual path. That would imply that I come down on the side of the argument that says that matter is created by consciousness. But do I live my life that way? Do I truly live my life every day on a day-to-day basis as if I truly believe that? As if not only I thought it was good to talk about it and feel good talking about it, but do I really live my life that way? You'll hear me say during the course of the year that it's good every once in a while to observe behavior and to ask, what would I have to believe in order for that behavior to make sense? Because it is in observing our behavior and it is in asking and answering that question that we can get a deeper hold on what we truly believe. Right? You've heard me use the story that Eric Butterworth put in his book Spiritual Economics about St. Anne, who grew up in a well-to-do home and decided that she needed to abandon all of the privilege of her upbringing and to go live in poverty and to serve the poor and thus serve God, a kind of a theme of the medieval saints, St. Francis and Clare and others. But this was kind of the idea. So St. Anne got up in the middle of the night one night and took off her night clothes, which were the clothes of a wealthy person, and she put on ordinary clothes so that she would pass as an ordinary person when she went out on the street. And she was leaving the house. So the symbolism here is she's leaving the house, she's leaving all of the benefits of her family, her wealthy home, and she is going out into the world and she's going to trust completely in God. She's going to trust completely in God to provide whatever it is that she needs and the people that she serves needs, because God is all there is. And on her way toward the door, she passes the mantle, and there's a little jar on the mantle where the family kept change. We all probably have a place where we come in and we empty our pockets out and drop our change somewhere. And she reached in that little jar and she took a penny, because a penny would buy a loaf of bread, and she thought she would take that penny and she would go out into the world and she would have her loaf of bread. And as she was going to the door, this voice stopped and spoke to her. And of course, she believed it was the voice of God, and said, "What's the penny for? What's the penny for?" And at that moment, she realized that even though she was professing her deep faith in God to provide for her everything that she needed, her behavior, her action of reaching in that jar to grab a penny to buy a loaf of bread was betraying her dependence in the material, her dependence in the money. So it's good for us every once in a while to go back and ask ourselves, well, how does my behavior reveal my deeper belief and my opportunity to grow, right? My opportunity to grow. So in the story, Eric Butterworth has St. Anne putting the penny back and going out into the world deeper in her faith and her trust of God. But we have this great opportunity before us every day, this thing called work that most of us go to, this thing called work. And our attitudes towards work, our beliefs about work are revealed in the way that we work. in the way that we feel when we go to work. And they reveal to us whether we believe that work is a spiritual activity and expression of life, a self-givingness of the Spirit through the creative process as us, that we are completely in this flow of the divine, which never has to work hard. It's busy, but it doesn't have to work hard. Or are we going to work to earn our bread by the sweat of our brow, to put it in biblical terms? Do we believe that work is something to avert ourselves from? Do we believe that work is labor and it is struggle, which is the materialistic view of the world? And wherever we are on that continuum, on that path is okay. It just tells us where we are. It gives us the feedback that we need in order to decide which direction we want to go and how much of our time and attention we want to put into that. William James in 1898 gave a series of lectures at Edinburgh University in Scotland, and it became published in a book called The Varieties of Religious Experience. A very thick book, it's like 500 pages, paperback. And I once told somebody I read that, and they said, you're either a preacher or a professor, because those are the only two kinds of people in the world that would read all the way through that book. And it was very interesting what he did, what James did, was he said, let's not explore religion in terms of theology. Now, if you go to most textbooks and you start to open a textbook to see, what the fundamental tenets of any particular religion might be, they never tell you about how people behave. They never tell you about what difference does this religious idea make in your life. They start to catalog all aspects of the religion in a manner that really doesn't tell you anything about it. So for example, go this afternoon and go on the internet and look up Egyptian religion, and the first thing they start to do is catalog all the different deities of the Egyptian religion. If you went and looked up something about Catholicism, you might find the page that starts to list what we as children growing up learning catechism call the communion of saints, all of the different saints that are recognized in the Catholic religion. Well, knowing the names of the deities in the Egyptian religion or knowing the names of the saints in the Catholic religion really doesn't tell you very much about what it is for people who grew up in that religion. How did they behave? How did it affect their life? It just tells us a little bit about what scholars might be able to write down, but it doesn't tell us about how these people lived. So James kind of took a different approach, and he looked at that, and he said, let's look at the experience. Let's look at the experience that people have, and let's see if we can tell by their behavior how their behavior kind of reflects their beliefs, how these beliefs affect their behavior, kind of a thing. And that's what we want to do. That's what we want to do. We want to look at our behavior. We want to look at what we do. We want to look at how we feel about what we do. And we want to ask ourselves, well, what does that reveal to me about my true beliefs? So Labor Day is a great time to look at work, because Labor Day in itself is almost an oxymoron if you think about it. It is a day when society is supposed to honor those who labor, and it is built in in a class system. There was the aristocracy who had the money. I guess today we would call them the 1%. And then there's the people who did the work. There's the people who labored in the fields, and they grew the food, and they weaved the cloth, and they did all of the menial tasks that it took to keep society running. And we needed to stop one day a year, and we needed to honor that class of people, right? Again, a sense of separation, against a sense of elitism, a sense of we all are going to give you a day off to show you that we honor your work. And of course, I think, when you go to work, any opportunity for a day off is great. So we have this holiday then. We have this holiday, and we have parades, and of course it comes near the end of summer, which kind of helps in the celebration. But if we stop and think about what it is that we're celebrating, we are celebrating this idea that labor is hard and difficult and something to be avoided, and that it is something that the lower classes of people engage in, not the people who can think, not the people who have money, but the lower classes, the labor class of people. And the whole idea, to me, this whole idea of Labor Day itself is something that perhaps we shouldn't be celebrating at all. Perhaps we should be looking for a way to recognize the goodness and the greatness and the potential and the ability in each and every person, regardless of where the financial circumstances at the moment might put them. Perhaps we should be looking at the entire ladder of our social structure, and this idea that, you know, people who are working for minimum wage or below are on the bottom rung, and the people who are making bazillions of dollars an hour, well, they're at the top rung. So we can start to look at that and say, well, gee, what does this idea about labor in society, what does it tell me about the way society is thinking? That's my point. What does society as a whole think about work and about labor? And we can see that it is not a very kind idea. The idea is that work is something that we don't want to do, but we do so we can get money to go do what we really want to do. You know, it's kind of this exchange, it's kind of this selling of ourselves in order to get something else. It's this, as the Dalai Lama might say, it's kind of like the lowest level of human interaction, of people using each other to get something from each other without even really caring about each other. You know. So let's look at these ideas quickly, where they come from in our society, and another way of looking at it, and how we might possibly bridge the gap between the two, because there's definitely a gap. So we must remember, we must understand that the society that we live in, the rules of the society that we live in, these are creations of human consciousness. The human mind has created this. The Constitution of our country, the founding documents of other countries, these were written by human beings. These are human ideas that are taking the form of structure of society. So what we see around us is really nothing more than a reflection of some beliefs that people hold. And of course those beliefs can change, and those structures can change, and the way things are can change, because it is done unto us according to our belief. But in our society, we have always, I won't say always, but in the last several hundred years, in the Western society, the idea is that work is a curse. Work is a curse. In the book of Genesis, we're told that because Adam sinned, he was cast out of the garden, and he was told, you're going to eat your bread by the sweat of your brow, and Eve was told, you are going to bear your children in pain. This is a curse. And of course we call giving birth to a child labor. So this is a curse. So this idea then is that work is a curse that is inflicted upon us, or brought unto us by our own sinfulness. And this is something that we need to do. We need to live through this, so somehow we're atoning for our sins. We have this, we called it the work ethic, you know, that we were raised with. That you need to go to work. You need to get up in the morning. You need to go to work. You need to work hard, and you need to come home. And when you come home, you need to be too tired to get into any trouble. Right? You can't go out to the saloon because you're too tired. You can't go out and play cards. You can't go smoking and drinking and all of these other things because you're tired. So work is good for you. Work keeps you out of trouble, because after all, it is the idle hands that are the devil's playground. So we have this work ethic that is nothing more than an idea, nothing more than a belief that people have accepted, that is not necessarily true, but because they have believed it to be so, they have created entire systems and entire societies around that. And of course, many of the people who were involved in creating these societies were doing that because it benefited them personally. It put money in their pocket personally. I was just reading some history of pre-colonial times in the colonies of North and South Carolina a few weeks ago. And what I came to learn is that um, many of the people who became the Patriot leaders and led the revolution against England were upset. Like when the Stamp Act was passed in 1765, they revolted against it, but they revolted against it because it hurt their business. The Stamp Act brought business to a halt because people could not afford to pay the taxes to have legal documents filed that they needed to have filed to conduct business. So these people were revolting against the tyranny of England, but they were revolting from a place of it was hurting their pocketbook. It was hurting their pocketbook. So we have to keep in mind that that the people in power, the people who rose to power, who were instrumental in some cases in creating these societies, they were working out of an old set of ideas that work needed to be hard, but for them it was usually somebody else's work. I remember reading that in one of the motivational books I read back in the 70s. It said if somebody tells you that they made their fortune through hard work, ask them whose work is hard. If you look back into the times when the Europeans were setting out their sailing ships and going around the world, and they called it, voyages of exploration, and what they were doing was they were sailing around the world, and they were finding native peoples who lived in a totally different environment. They lived in an environment which we would call paradise today. Can you imagine growing up in a place where if you were hungry, you just walked out the door and you picked fruit off the tree, or you just walked down to the lagoon and you caught a fish because there were so many in the lagoon? And that's the level of activity it took in order to stay alive. That the climate was so gentle that all you needed to survive was a grass hut. You didn't have to chop and split wood for 3 months out of the year so you could keep warm in the wintertime. So there's people with this idea that you need to work hard because working hard is good for the growth of your soul. They get on their boats and they sail halfway around the world, and they pretty much enslave the native people who were living in paradise. They put them to work growing sugar and growing breadfruit plants and things that would enrich the status of the people back home. So you can see this idea of work needs to be hard. It's good for you. It keeps you out of trouble. Look, you folks are all lazy and idle. You're not doing anything productive here because you're just laying around enjoying life. So they put them to work and they made them work hard, but they made them work hard out of grasping, right? Out of greed. They made them work hard in order to provide money to send back to the homeland. Same thing in North and South America. They had people digging for gold and trying to find gold to send back to the European countries, enslaving the native population, infesting them with disease and all these things because of an idea, that work needed to be hard, and grasping and greed is good. Wealth is good. So our entire society has been based upon these beliefs and these ideas. And if you look at our financial markets are nothing more than creations of human mind. And if we look at the way that business is run in this country, it is a reflection of many of those beliefs. That we run business in order to create wealth for investors who really don't necessarily care much about the business other than the rate of return that they can get from it. And in this regard, then what happens is that work, when people go to work, people are a commodity. People are a commodity that is used in the business, and that's their value. And now they're being replaced by robots, but people are nothing more than a tool to be used. And they come to work, and we're going to get people who can do the absolute most work in the least amount of time for the least amount of money. And if they can't, we're going to replace them with somebody who can. This was a great transition as people moved from their farms into the mills in the latter part of the 1800s, and then we get into the earlier part of the 1900s. There was a change in the way that management viewed workers and paid workers, and they started to put them on production. And if you could bring somebody in who could produce a lot In a short period of time, those were the ones that you hired, and if they burned out and left, well, you just brought other people in. So you could see this idea then that human beings were just something to be used up, something to be consumed. And the connection between what people did in order to earn money and what they were as a spiritual being, it made no importance. It made no difference. Not to the business owner, not to the investors. So our entire society then is built around this idea of work as just a commodity. It is something that you do, and you sell yourself to your work in order to make money so that you can go do the other things that you want to do with your life. And there's a great disconnect there. There's something missing. There's something that is not fulfilling, that is not satisfying. And I want to share with you some ideas today from Khalil Gibran, in his book, The Prophet, which if you haven't read it in a long time or haven't read it at all, I suggest that you go online. It's available online, and read it this afternoon. You can read the entire book in one afternoon sitting outside, taking in a beautiful day. But the setting of The Prophet is that this prophet had been in a far-off country for a number of years teaching. And it was time for him to return to his homeland, and he was down by the seaport, and he was waiting for the ship that was going to take him home to arrive. And the people gathered around him, and they wanted one last series of lessons from him before he went. And the setting is that he's there, and people are asking him questions. And one will say, tell us about love. And then there's a brief discourse on love. And tell us about marriage. There's a brief discourse on marriage. Tell us about children. And there's one on work. And Gibran is kind of beloved because of his ability to kind of put things in poetry, in a language that speaks to the heart. And what he starts off with, so the setting is that the plowman said to the prophet, he said, speak to us of work. And the prophet answered, saying, you work that you may keep pace with the earth and the soul of the earth. When you work, you are a flute, through whose heart the whispering of the hours turns to music. Always you have been told that work is a curse and labor a misfortune. But I say to you that when you work, you fulfill a part of the earth's furthest dream, assigned to you when that dream was born. So this is a totally different idea of work, you see. This idea of work as being something that I don't want to do, but I have to do it because I have to make money, and it takes money to live. And I don't know how to get money other than to go to work. Now remember, that is an agreement that human consciousness has made. It is an agreement that human consciousness has made, and we don't know any other way, so we try to live as best as we can in it. But that is not the way that we've been taught spiritually. Remember when Jesus was speaking to the disciples in the Sermon on the Mount, they said to him, but what about practical things? We have boats to paint, we have nets to mend, we have mouths to feed, we have to maintain houses and families. And we have a lot of things to do in order to just make a living. Okay? And you're talking to us about studying all of these spiritual things. And Jesus said to him, seek first the kingdom. Seek first the kingdom, and all these things will be added unto you. All of these things will be added unto you. Take no thought, take no fear, take no worry. Look at the birds of the air and the lilies of the field, they're provided for. How much more so would the Father in heaven provide for you? Because you and I, we are expressions of the divine. So the spiritual idea then is that work is not meant to be labor. Work is not meant to be a struggle. Work is not meant to be something to be averted. It is not something to be grasped for monetary gain. But it is something different. As Gibran tells us, it is an expression of the self. It is a way that we connect ourselves. It's a way that we connect ourselves in love to God and to each other. It is really a way that we experience fulfillment. If you think about, in the Buddhist terms, if you think about this grasping and this aversion that we were talking about last week, Our human life is filled with different appetites or different desires. And that, that appetite in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. It is something that motivates us to engage in an activity which may or may not be good for us. It's up to us to choose. So for example, thirst. Thirst is an appetite, a desire that is seeking satiation. It is seeking a sort of fulfillment, a temporary fulfillment. And that thirsting causes us to go engage in the process of taking drink, which may or may not be good for us, depending upon what we choose to drink. We can choose to drink water, which is healthy and good for us, or we can choose to drink something that is not good for us, something that is not only not good for us, but something that even makes us thirstier. Right? Some of the beverages that manufacturers are selling today, they have salt and other ingredients in it that make us thirstier than we were before we took the drink, which leads us to drink more of their product, which serves their grasping, right? Which serves their idea of they need to be in this business to gain wealth, even if it is at other people's expense. But it doesn't fulfill us. It doesn't satisfy us. The more we do it, the thirstier we get. Well, we can engage in drinking water, right? which satisfies our thirst, which gives the body the nutrients that it needs. But eventually we get thirsty again. Even if we drink water, eventually we get thirsty again. And this desire to drink again arises, and it causes us to go and it causes us to drink some more. But we're not fulfilled. We're not fulfilled in that. So we have to keep doing it over and over and over again. And yet in the New Testament we're told, if you drink water you get thirsty again, but if you drink from the well that I have, the Christ consciousness has, you'll never thirst again. You'll be fulfilled. You'll be completely fulfilled. And I believe that the essence of what is motivating us as human beings, what we're trying to do, is we're seeking fulfillment. We don't know where to look. We don't necessarily know how to look, but what we're seeking is fulfillment. We're seeking the end of seeking is what we want to do. We want to be in a state of happiness. We want to be in a state of fulfillment where we're not moving out of need. Maybe that's the best way to put it. We drink because we need to drink to live. We're moving out of need. But what we have to recognize is that God doesn't move out of need. God doesn't need anything. God has everything. God is everything. God is not moving out of a state of need, but it is only moving out of a state of self-expression. It is only doing things because these things bring it joy, and they bring it fulfillment, and they bring it a new and exciting experience. So what we come down to then is that we have to recognize, if we look at work from the spiritual level, instead of being the drudgery and the labor and the thing that we have to do to make money and all of that stuff, we start to think of the possibility that work is an expression of self. Work is an expression of love. Right? Work is the way that we find a fulfilling, that it is in doing the activity of work. Right? And there's a difference, I guess, in our mindset about activity and work. Right? So work is activity that we engage in for a particular purpose. And play is activity that we engage in for no particular purpose. And usually when we work, we feel spent, we feel worn out, we feel less than fulfilled. But when we play, we're exhausted and fulfilled. Wasn't that great? Wasn't that a great game? Wasn't that fun? Wasn't walking up that mountain trail fun? I'm tired, I'm going to go take a nap, but by God, it was exhilarating. So you see, we can engage in activity, and the activity itself can either be fulfilling or not fulfilling. But it's an attitude of how we look at it. So what we want to do is we want to recognize then that from the spiritual view of work, we want to think of an activity that is fulfilling, an activity that is allowing us to express more of who we are, an activity that is allowing us to fulfill our purpose in life. An activity that is joyful, an activity that is a blessing to us and to everyone who comes into our presence, anyone who benefits from whatever it is that we are doing. We think of the lilies of the field, and they don't toil, and they don't put things up, but yet they're adorned. We think of the birds of the air. I used to love getting up early in the morning and going down to the ocean and watching the seabirds going out for their day in the ocean to fish. And they would just go by, in flocks of thousands and thousands of birds. And if you go back to that same spot at sundown, you would see those flocks of birds coming back in. And they would be flying out in the morning, they would be flying out into the ocean, and you didn't get the sense of struggle. You didn't get the sense of aversion. You didn't get the sense that this was going to be hard and, oh my God, what are we going to do if we don't find the school of fish today, or any of that. They were just moving according to the way that they were meant to move. They were just living life according to the way that they were programmed to live life. And there was no negative mental attitude that we find in our society about work. And what we want to consider is that the true nature, the spiritual nature of work, if in fact consciousness does create matter, which is what we believe, then that the true spiritual nature of work is that it can be fulfilling. And it can be an expression of ourself, and it can be an expression of God's love, if we believe it to be so. If we believe it to be so. And that's where we get the opportunity to ask ourselves, how is it that what I am doing reveals to me what I am believing? And for many of us, this is where the rubber hits the road, because we say, well, yes, I understand that there's a power in the universe that responds to me according to my belief. Yes, I understand that it's consciousness that molds matter and circumstances into the form appropriate for its expression. But I still have to make a living. I still have to have money. So I have to sell myself by going to a job that I really don't want to go to in order to get some money to hopefully do the things that I do enjoy doing. And it is at this point that we can say that there lies our opportunity for growth. Because if we can move beyond that belief that we have to live in the world according to the rules that the world made, and we can replace it with the belief that life is a spiritual exercise, and that there's a higher set of rules that are unaffected by the human rules, then we can start to find and experience joy in our work. And we can find and experience sources of income that we never conceived of in the past. See, we are the ones who think I have to go to work to get a paycheck to make a living. But that is a set of rules that we bought into. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So the first thing we have to do is we have to ask ourselves, what is it that I believe about supply? And that is the energy that is taking the form of money or of food or of water or of all the other things that I need in order to live. And we must recognize that supply is our connection to the divine. Our good depends not on the quality of our paycheck, but our good depends on the quality of our connection with the divine. That the intelligence that knows how to bring those fish into existence and the birds into existence and brings them together for the mutual benefit of each species, it knows how to provide for us and everything that we need, because it is us. It is living as us and through us. So we can begin our spiritual journey, our spiritual practice of breaking out of the old way of thinking by doing our spiritual practice, our treatment work, our reading, our studying on this idea of spiritual supply. Furthering our idea and our belief in the power that responds to us according to our belief, by doing our spiritual practice and observing the changes in our life and recognizing that that same power can produce for us a work experience that is joyful, that is loving, that is fulfilling, that is something that we would do whether we got paid or not. And we can release this belief that we have to get paid for everything we do. We don't have to get paid for everything we do directly from that exchange. We can give all of our gifts and talents over here and receive all of our income from someplace over there. The two don't have to be connected. And the question usually arises when we start to have this discussion. People will say, well, what do you expect me to do? Do you expect me to just quit my job and go sit at home and stare at the wall and have $100 bills drop from the ceiling? Is that what you want me to believe? And the answer is, well, if you can believe that, that would be good, you know. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about fulfillment. We're talking about finding a way to allow Spirit to fulfill itself as you and through you. And growing in the consciousness to the point where you can accept the fact that the more and more that you are in conscious communion with God, giving of your gifts and talents in a way that is fulfilling, that a way that is loving, that a way that is kind, that everything else will take care of itself. Maybe $100 bills won't rain from the ceiling, but maybe avenues of income will open up for you that you had never expected before. And the way to do this, we go to Emma Curtis Hopkins, and Emma Curtis Hopkins says, swing the hammer until the love of God takes it out of your hand. Swing the hammer, right? What is she saying? She's saying recognize that you're working because of a covenant that you have made, because of an agreement that you have made with old ways of thinking that I need to work this way in order to make a living. That's what most of our society is doing. But start to grow spiritually and recognize that that's not the only way, that there is another way, and that we choose to trust in what we're being taught. We choose to trust in what Jesus said when he said, seek first the kingdom and everything else will be added unto you. And as we do that, and as we grow spiritually, as our beliefs change, as our consciousness changes, as the law of mind works through our changing consciousness, our need to struggle and swing the hammer goes away. Other ways are presented to us. We are led out of that drudgery that we were stuck in, and we are led into other paths easily, effortlessly. It unfolds before us. So we don't say run out and quit your job, stop working and just sit around and pray all day. What we're saying is pray, treat, read, study, believe, do everything that you can and that you know that you ought to do in your spiritual practice to bring your mind, your belief, to a different way of viewing work, to trusting in the divine, to find a way to give of the gifts and talents you have in service, how to be in service. You don't have to get paid for it. You can go to the library and help children read. You can go to a hospital and you can help people who are in distress as they're waiting for their family members to come out of surgery. There are millions of ways that you can find to serve. So find what it is that your heart wants to give, and then go find a way to give it, and stop thinking about whether or not you're going to get paid for it. Continue to do your spiritual practice. Continue to read. Continue to study. Continue to do your treatment that you know. You know that there's a power in the universe that not only knows how to provide, but is providing for you in ways that you don't need to understand. And let those doors open for you. So I want to close with some of the closing thoughts of Gibran in his chapter. What we're talking about is getting away from this idea of work as a struggle, and getting into this idea that work is love made visible. So give me just a second here and see if I can get my pad to find it for me. So, it says, and when you work with love, you bind yourself to yourself and to one another and to God. And this is what we're talking about. Can I get into this feeling that what my activity is binding myself to myself, binding myself to my God, binding myself to one another, to my world. And what is it to work with love? It is to weave the cloth with threads drawn from your heart, even as if your beloved were to wear that cloth. It is to build a house with affection, even as if your beloved were to dwell in that house. It is to sow seeds with tenderness and reap the harvest with joy, even as if your beloved were to eat the fruit. It is to charge all things you fashion with the breath of your own spirit. Often I have heard you say, as if speaking in sleep, he who works in marble and finds the shape of his own soul in the stone is nobler than he who plows the soil. And he who seizes the rainbow to lay it on the cloth in the likeness of man is more than he who makes sandals for the feet. But I say not in sleep, but in the over-wakefulness of noontide, that the wind speaks not more sweetly to the giant oaks than to the least of all blades of grass. And he alone is great who turns the voice of the wind into the song made sweeter by his own loving. Work is love made visible. And if you cannot work with love, but only with distaste, it is better that you should leave your work and sit at the gate of the temple and take alms of those who work with joy. For if you bake bread with indifference, you bake a bitter bread that feeds but half a man's hunger. And so it is. And I'm going to let that reading be our closing treatment for today. I just invite you this month of September, when we're focusing on Labor Day, explore your beliefs. What is it that you truly believe about work? What is it that your behavior about work and your attitude at work reveal to you about what you must believe? Is it a drudgery? Is it a joy? It is something that you do because you have to, or is it something that you do because you love to do it? And if you're not where you want to be, if your observation reflects back to you that you are not where you want to be, then make this, as Emmett Fox called it, make your problem your spiritual project. Use the tools in your spiritual toolbox to do whatever needs to be done to change your consciousness. And as your consciousness changes, your circumstance will change. And you can find yourself in a position where you are fulfilled, where you are giving of your gifts and talents in a wonderful way, where you are serving the love of God in a wonderful way, where you actually feel like, my God, I would do this even if they didn't pay me. Or maybe you are doing it and they're not paying you, but you're getting paid in some other way, through some other avenue, through some other channel of income. So I invite you then this day, if you will, get a copy of the Prophet. Go somewhere where you can sit and read and reflect upon the chapter specifically on work, but if you can, reflect on the whole book. It is a wonderful, wonderful discourse that leads us to a deeper exploration of what we believe. I personally believe that consciousness created matter. That we are not here simply to see who can get the most toys before they die, who can make the most money, who can use up the most resources. But we are here, truly, to end ignorance, to end grasping, to end aversion, to come to know God as God, to come to know love as love, to come to see things as they truly are, not as human consciousness has conspired to make them appear to be. That is a great blessing. That is a great blessing that we can all give to the world. If we can break out of the illusion, break out of the dream of materialism, and break into the spiritual awareness that there is another set of rules, a higher set of rules, a better set of rules. We just have to believe in them, practice working with them, and cooperate with them. And so it is. So we want to thank